Okay, let's get started. I've muted your lines. Just unmute yourself when you want to ask a question. Now, in the last session, we have seen about components that persist data, that is, entity objects. So they interact with the database and retrieve data from database. Then after modification, it can save the database data back to the database. So they are for the persistence mechanism. Next, we'll come to view objects, which are the components that shape the data to be presented to the client. Client can be anything like that user interface or desktop integration or anything. So we need to shape the data properly to display to the client. View objects do that work for us. So today we'll go in depth into the view objects and explore all parts of view object. The agenda goes like this. First, we'll explore the architecture, which is the first and foremost thing we need to understand about any component. Then we'll look at specific features of view object. Then we'll create view objects in different manners. Like there are multiple types of view objects. We will see how to create each kind of view object. Then we'll explore the attributes and properties of view objects, just like we did for the entity objects. Next, we will see how to add the bind variables, which are runtime inputs, and then how to add view criteria, which are dynamic where clauses. After that, we'll see how to generate the Java classes and what kind of Java classes will back up the view object. Okay, almost all the concepts will be quite similar to entity object. That doesn't mean both can be related one-to-one. You'll understand the difference in architecture. Here goes the view object architecture. So, first thing, as we discussed earlier, any component in ADF has an XML representation, which stores the metadata, like the definition of that particular component. So, view definition is such component. Sorry, such definition of component in XML format. This view definition will be used to create view object. So the view object is nothing but a query. You can simply remember it as a query plus some other things. So what that other things are? Attribute definitions. So in the query, you will have all the columns that you want to read from the database, but you represent them as attributes. So you'll have the definitions of attributes, what kind of attribute is that, and if it is dependent on any entity object, such information that this view object is dependent on the entity, and then any bind variables and view criteria, all the definitions will go into this view object. And at the runtime, they create instance of this view object. Okay, if you remember in entity objects, we were creating instances of rows, but here we'll have instances of the view object as well. Okay. There when we say entity object, it was a row, but here when we say view object, it is a instance of one particular combination of query and criteria. Okay. And this view object will be used to query data, and that data is again stored in row set. So in a row set, in the bottom of the screen, you can see row set, where we have multiple rows that are fetched from the database. These rows are fetched by using the query in this view object and optionally appending any bind values at the runtime. So these are stored in the row set object, which will store the bind values also, and the row set iterator, which is nothing but a pointer to current rows. Like it will help us navigate through the rows. In reality, these rows will not, these are only for handles for us, handles to the rows, but the actual data gets stored in another object called a query collection. Query collection will store the actual real rows, the physical data, and we will be accessing them through the row sets. Why this distinction is a kind of performance reason, because one view object instance can have multiple row sets. Why we need multiple row sets is, suppose I change the bind values. Suppose there is a query. Let me explain what bind value means. For example, when you have a query on employees, select star from employees, and you append a where condition, but you want to where condition on employee ID, but you want to provide that employee ID at the runtime. So you'll create a bind variable which you will populate at the runtime. So at the runtime, suppose you provided 101 as a bind variable. This query executes and it gets one row of data. So one row set will get created, which will store the bind value which was used for query, that is 101, and also a set of rows, in our case only one row, and an iterator to navigate through that rows. All this data is present in the query collection also, because it fetched from the database, it puts in a query collection. Now you run the same query using a different bind variable. Value for bind variable. Suppose you used 102 as a value. It will create another row set, and it will try to use the same query collection if it is possible. But the same query collection doesn't have our data we want, so it will create a separate query collection. But in cases where the query collection is a superset of these row sets, like for example, there are some 10 rows in the query collection, and using our bind variables, we are mapping to one of the rows, and second bind variable is getting second row. So in that case, the same query collection will be used, but different row sets will be there. So the same data we are looking at, but through different row sets. That's why there is a split of row sets and collections. Okay, and on the top of this diagram, we have another view object which we can link with view. Okay, so we can link the view objects using a view link. So like we were talking about, view link is the link between two view objects based on some condition, just like the association which we have in the UO level. Then we'll move on to one step. Yeah. So the same thing which we are seeing in the picture, there is one view definition object. It contains the query and bind parameters, that is bind variables, and the attribute definition. And the view object is a individual instance of one query execution and the bind variables. So just a small difference comparing to entity object. Entity object is a row level. Entity object is a row, but view object is actually a query. What maps directly to entity object is the view row. So the naming might confuse you, so I'm explaining it again. So view row is the individual row of data in the view object, and view object is individual instance of the query at the runtime. Because the query differs from each instance to instance, that's why we'll have different instances and with the different row set navigators at the runtime. Okay. So we were talking about view criteria and bind variables. Let's see what they are. In the demo, you'll understand it more clearly. Just let me give a briefing on top of that. So when you create a view object, you write a query for that. So in the query, you can mention a condition, a where condition, using the bind variables or direct where condition. On top of that where condition, you can define view criteria, which are dynamic where conditions. That means the base query doesn't contain them. But at the runtime, you can select specific criteria to be appended to the actual query. On top of on top of the base query, you can append these conditions. I'll show that in the demo.
Where condition. What does a where condition mean?
Sorry, what does a where condition mean?
Yeah.
The where condition is like when you write a query, select staff and employees. You have to filter the data specific to some conditions, some criteria. So in that case, you'll provide a where employee ID equal to something, right?
Okay. Yeah, that normal. It's like a normal condition only.
Yeah, the condition. That's what is called where condition in SQL.
Okay.
SQL is query is built of a select clause, then a where clause, and a from clause, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is the where condition which we are referring to.
Okay.
That where condition can be part of query, which of the base query. But if you want additional where conditions, which we want to dynamically append to that query, then we define this view criteria. I think you'll understand better when I show you the demo. Okay, let me switch to demo then. I'm opening up JDL. Hold a minute. Okay, so where the where condition goes is, I'll open a view, and in the query tab, you can see the query here, and below that you can see the where condition. Here we are selecting all the rows from the employee table. So suppose you want to select only a few rows. For example, I want to get only employees who is having the ID, where employee ID equal to 101. So when I do like this where condition is becoming a part of the main query. So whenever I use this view object instance, what happens is this where condition will be a part of the query. So every time I use this view object instance, the same condition will get appended. Right? When view criteria comes into picture is, I don't want this condition to be appended always. I want it to be appended dynamically. I should be able to select when to apply that condition, when not to apply that condition. In that case, I'll define it as a view criteria. I'll have control when to append it and when not to append it. I'll show you when I'm going through the example of that. I'll come step by step. Just to tell you what this where condition is, I came here. Okay, back to the presentation. So after view criteria, then we have bind variables, which again mean instead of directly providing a value here, I can say some bind variable name, bind empid, which I'll provide at the runtime. I'm not even providing in the query, but I'll provide it in the runtime. Okay, then there are view accessors, which we use to access another view object. For example, we are in employees view, and I have a department ID, but I want to show department name also, which is not inside this table. So in that case, I can use another table and get the values from that table using the view. In that case, I'll use an accessor, something called an accessor, where I will define an accessor. It means I'm getting a handle to another view object. Okay, I'll show you that. Okay. Let me complete the theoretical part first. Okay, so the features of view object, just like entity object, we are looking at features. So declarative development and declarative validation we have already seen in entity objects. That is, we don't need to write code much. We'll use the wizards and options to create the metadata for the validations and attribute definition, etc. And then view objects support master-child relationships inbuilt. That is, when you create view links between the view objects, they automatically give the master and child relationships. You don't need to code anything about that. Like for example, if you remember when we opened employees and departments tables in the AM tester, we were able to see all employees under one department. We have not written any specific code for that. Just by using the view link, ADF was able to make out that these are related. Then QBE support means query by example. What it means is when we drag and drop any view object onto the UIs, we'll have an option called QBE. QBE means query by example. Like, suppose you have a table displayed from view object. On top of the table, you'll have input fields where you can give some value and filter the data. I'll show you that also. Then result catching in the architecture we have discussed. There is a query collection which will store the results, and it will try to use the results from that cache instead of hitting the database always. If the data is matching our requirement, it will use it from the cache. So this is the inbuilt implementation of view object. Then the CRUD operation support, just like the EO, it is aware of creating new objects, updating and deleting them. Then view links is again a relationship between view objects. Now we'll move on to the full-fledged demo. We'll see how to create view objects. There are 4 types of view objects we can create. One is entity-based, one is query-based, one is a static view object, which we will for which we will provide the values at the design time itself, and one is programmatic view. Let's discuss about them while creating them. Move on to JDEV. I'll start with a new application. Just taking Fusion application, okay, and just finish. I'm not setting any names. I'm okay to go with default implementations. Okay. Now my model is created. Model project is created. Nothing inside that. I'll quickly create an entity object, on top of which I want to show you the views. So I'm creating an entity object. There's no connection. I'll create one connection. Test. Database is not up. Let me quickly start it. Have you tried hands-on on these things, the entity object and creating some basic steps?
After you told me yesterday, I have done it for like 15-20 minutes. That's it. Then it was already 12:30 by that time.
Okay.
Yeah, so I slept and.
Yeah. But actually, you should have some hands-on practice. Only then
Definitely
you will understand easily. Otherwise,
yeah, but these sessions are too quick, so I'm not able to find some time to do it.
Yeah. But spend some time on that, at least after this session, because with this we will complete the business components part. You should be familiar with the screens at least and what is where, so that when we go into the UI from tomorrow, we'll be looking back at these options. So you'll be able to understand this. But there's no big rocket science here, but you just have to have some hands-on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my database is up, connected. Now I'm going to create an entity object. So this is like a revision for you. I'm creating an entity object, just querying from the database. I select employees, okay, and say, I can actually click finish because I'm not interested in customizing entity object as of now. I'm going for view object. Okay, we have the basic project here with an entity object. This is our entity object. Okay. Now what I'll do is I'll right click and go for new view object. Right. We'll inspect this wizard. So this is a create view object wizard with 9 steps. We'll see each step one by one. So first step, it's asking me for the package. It's quite similar to entity object wizard. In fact, all the wizards look similar. Depending on the type of object, you'll get options here. So there's a package where to store it. Then it's asking me for the name of view object. I will say employees view. Okay. Then there are 4 options here. Entity. So it's asking me where I want to base my view object on. So view object can either be dependent on entity, or it can be directly querying database in the case when it is just read-only, where I don't need to write back the data, meaning I don't need any persistence logic. The third thing is programmatic VO, where I want to write a VO at the runtime, or I want to build the query in a customized manner. I don't want to go with the default ADF frameworks way of doing VO. So this is much advanced concept. We will not be covering it now. And then a static list, where suppose you have a list of days. So they are static. In that case, you don't need to query such data from databases. You can avoid DB round trips, and you can hard code your data, which is more or less static. Okay, like days of week, months, etc. They are static. So we can hard code them in our VO itself, in the query itself. So in that case, we'll use static. First, we'll go through entity. Based on entity, we'll go first. So I'm selecting entity object and clicking on next. Okay, so because I selected entity objects, now the wizard tunes to that options. It's showing me what all entities are available. I'll select my employees entity and I shuffle it here. So I want to base my VO on employees EO. So this page is fine. Then I go to next. It's asking me which attributes I want to have in my VO. Why it's asking me is because I need not necessarily have all the attributes inside my VO. Suppose I just want to display only some attributes. For example, employee ID is something that we don't display to user. Okay, so we can avoid selecting it. So that's why you have all these options of which value you want to select, which attribute you want to select. For now, let's select all of them. Okay. So what it is saying here is, it's creating an attribute called commission PCT, which is based on employees EO's commission PCT field. Similarly, it's giving me what fields in the database these attributes are getting based through the EO. Okay, I'll go to next. Here it's giving me all the attributes and I can customize their features. Okay, all the attributes are here and I can customize these features. We can do it later also after the object is created. Let's go with next. And here it's showing me options to create the query. Because I based it on the entity object, it was aware of the list of attributes. So it's saying I'll select all these attributes. And it's asking me if I want to define any where condition and any order by class. This is called a declarative way of designing the query. Okay, we have three modes of writing a query. One is declarative, that is what we are saying. It means I don't see the query, I'll only select what I want, and JDev will write an optimized query in the background for me. So this is a recommended approach, but it's not always sufficient for us. Sometimes we need to manipulate the query, tune the query to our needs. So if you uncheck this box, calculate optimized query at runtime, if you uncheck this, now the query mode will become normal. I mean, it's called normal mode. Earlier was declarative mode. This is normal mode. In this normal mode, you can actually update the query as you like. Maybe suppose you want to combine both first name and last name into one. No, actually in the normal mode, you can only write the where condition. So you can actually write the where condition here. Okay. Oh, let me come back a step. I think it's lost. Okay. When you select this checkbox, the query mode is called declarative mode, where ADF framework will take care of writing the query and optimizing it, everything in the background. You have minimal control on this. When you uncheck this box, you have a control on the where clause first. So this mode is called a normal mode, where you can simply say add some where condition, employees EO dot first name equal to Nina, like this. Like this, you can add the condition. Still, you are not having control on the select clause, but you can change the where clause. So this is normal mode. If you want to go to expert mode, where you can control the whole query, you can select this option, write custom SQL. So in this mode, you can customize the complete query. For example, I was saying, I want to join the first name and last name together. Okay. As name, full name. So I can change my query like this. So to get this options, we have to select the type of query we want to write. Okay. For now, let's leave it back in the optimized mode. That is the original query. Okay, just wanted to show you the options that are available there. We'll move on to next. It's asking me if I want to create any bind variables. As of now, no. We'll create going forward. Then Java classes, just like the entity object. We have Java classes. It's asking me if I want to add to application module. We can do it later. Just say finish. Now I got my view object, which is based on entity object. So if you want to see whether the view is based on entity objects or not, the second tab will give you that information. If you select entity objects and there is one selected EO, you can see that it is based on an employee's EO. To click that, it will take you to the EO. Okay, that's how you'll determine. Second thing, the second type of VO, what we wanted to design was query-based VO. Okay. Let's take in departments VO, which we will directly base on the query without using entity object. I say new view object, and I'll say departments VO. Now I'll select custom SQL query because I'm going to write query myself, not basing it on the entity object. Go to next, and it's asking me to write the query. Here also it offers me some help. Instead of writing it manually, typing it in manually, I can use the query builder, which gives me options to write my SQL query. So this query builder is nothing but it will give you all the options, like the select clause, the from clause, where clause, everything. You can write it individually. So first let's pick the objects. Go to query. I'm saying what database, what objects are there. I wanted this departments. I'll shuffle it. So it selected me all the attributes, and I'll say okay. Now the query is written for me. Okay, but point is it's not based on the entity object. There is no entity object involved in this picture. I can select the order by clause, and then I can go to next. Again, it's asking me bind variables, and it's giving me that these attributes are going to be created. Again, I can add them or remove them. All these operations I can do. The same screen as we saw earlier, customizing attribute properties, which we can do once we create the VO. In the Java classes, whether to add to app module or not, in the summary. So this department VO is created. Now if I go to entity objects and see there is no entity object selected here, it means it is not dependent on an entity object. Okay, similarly, there's a third type of VO, that is static VO. I'm going to view object, I'm selecting static list, some dummy VO, let it be there. When I say next, it is asking me what attributes I need to have, because there's no query, no entity, so it's not aware of the attributes. So I'll create some attribute, just one. And static VO will always be transient because it's not going to save any data back to the database. Otherwise, I can say weekday. Type string. I'll remove the view attribute. I created one attribute. I'm going to next. It's asking me details for that attribute, any properties I want to set, and then it's asking, always we should have a key attribute, so it's asking me should select a key attribute. Next, here we can give the static list. Okay, I'll add days like this. So it's like hard coding. Okay. So this is my view object, which is a static view. If you see it in this, see the source of this view object, it will contain the physical values that we are giving. In fact, they'll be stored in a resource bundle. You'll not see them here. The point is, you don't even have a concept of entity object here. You're not seeing any entity object tab here. It's not at all related to any entity object, not even a direct query. So it's a static view object where I can give the values like this. Ultimately, all the view objects will be used in the same way. The way they are defined and the way they are declared are a bit different. But they serve different purposes. Okay, that's the type of views we can see. Programmatic will not see now. That needs a lot of idea on view object architecture. Okay, we'll skip that for now. Again, we'll inspect through the properties of the view object, like we did for entity. So first, the persistent and transient attributes. The UI will be quite familiar because the EOs and VOs attribute pane is almost same. We'll have the attribute name here formed by the camel case, and it is giving us the type of attribute. And then alias name is what the column name is in the table, and it shows us from which entity that value has come. So our commission PCT is coming from employees EO. Similarly, all the other values also. Why it's showing entities, we can base a view object on multiple entities also. So at that time, this column becomes important. From which entity, that is which table we are getting this data. Okay. And then the bottom pane, the details are quite similar to the entity object. The name of object, type is not editable because it is only editable in the entity object where it was created. Then updatability we can control here. Never, while, new, and always. The same things which we have seen there. Persistent and transient again. The same way we created transient attributes in EVO, we can create them in VIVO also. But it is advisable to create anything at the lowest most possible level. So if you need a transient attribute, it's better to put it in the entity object rather than view object, because all other view objects which depend on the same entity can share it. Okay. Then other options like default values, literals and expression, here we can give the values exactly same as entity object. Here also we need to have one primary key. One value will be defined as a primary key. As we based it on the entity, by default we got the ID as a primary key. Then UI hints, just like the entity objects. Everything that we have in entity objects is here also. We can override the values which we gave on entity at view level, because as I said, multiple view objects can use the same entity object. At that time, if you define some value in the entity object level, you can override them at individual view object levels. So you can give a label to your component which will be used on the UI. Then a tooltip which will show, like when you touch any item, you'll get a tooltip, right? So that tooltip you can define here. You can define a specific format for the value that is going to be displayed in this component. And then you can beforehand define that this component should be displayed like a checkbox or a calendar input or an image. That depends on the data type which you have. All these components, UI components, will be available for this data type. Suppose you have some string values, then you'll get the same things we got. So checkbox, and you can display these values in specific UI component types. So this component will be used when you drag and drop this view object onto the UIs. You can define the width and height of the component on the UI. When you drag it onto the UI, this will be defaulted there. Okay, so yeah. So that's about properties. Then we'll come to an important part of this query, that is bind variables and view criteria, which we just had in our view a couple of slides ago. But we'll see it in more detail here. Now, let me first test this VO. Just wanted to see that it's defined correctly. The employees VO I want to test. So to test, I'll need an application module. I'll create an application module which will contain my VO. Okay, so this is VO instance. This is my definition. When I drag it into my app module, I got an instance. If I drag it multiple times, I will get multiple instances. So this will correspond to different row sets. I can be seeing the same employees data in different angles. I may have, I can see this one as a form, this one as a table, and in this I might be having some current row, I'm doing some operation, and this one I will have a different current row, I'll do some other operation. All this will have their own row sets and their own row iterators. But all of them will use the same cache if possible, same cache, and all of them are depending on the same entity object. Okay, this is where I can branch my data presentation to the client. Okay, as of now, let me have only one for demo purpose. So I selected this view object instance, and this is no Java classes, just my simple app module, which contains my view. Okay, let's run it first. Okay, I got my M tester. I have the employees view. So it's showing me all the employees, starting with first employee. If I click on next, it's going on to next employees. So my design is okay. Now I will go with the bind variables and view criteria. Okay, just close this. I'll go to my definition, viewer definition. So this is my definition. And here I want to add a where condition. The query is currently in declarative mode. I can add a where condition. I have to make it to normal mode to add a where condition. Now here I am adding let's take employee ID itself. It's easy to understand. I'll take employee ID equal to 101. I added a hard-coded where condition to my query. Now see what happens. If I run it, at the runtime, the total query will have the where condition as well as two things here. The where condition is static and the value provided is static. Okay. So I get no more rows. I got only one rows. The next and previous icons are disabled because my query which was executed is having a where condition appended to it. Okay, let me show you the queries also. Don't worry about it. This is a small option I'm setting. I'll run it once again. So I actually turned on the debug messages. So when I ran this VO, I started getting the query also here. So in the log window, if you see, I'm expanding this. So in the log window, we got the query. And if you go to the far right, the where clause was appended. Let me wrap it. Okay. If you see the query here, okay, it's running the query with a where condition. I'm going to little right. So here is our where condition, which came as a part of query. But generally, this kind of appending where condition will not help us because at the runtime, we are actually restricting this query to one level. I mean, because the where condition is bound into the query, you cannot get rid of it. This will run all the time. But what I want is, I want to provide the employee number at the runtime. I want to filter it on employee ID, but the ID I want to provide it at the runtime. So I want to see data for different employees at a time. So for that purpose, I can make this value as a runtime variable. That is called a bind variable. Okay. So here what I'll say is, I'll say the bind variable syntax is, it starts with a colon and name of bind variable. So I'll say bind EMP ID. Okay. When I say this and come out, it asks me like you used a bind variable, so create it first. When I say create, when I use a bind variable, I have to define what type of value it is. So I know it's a number because it's employee ID. I said okay. Coming down in this page, you will see the bind variables here. So there is one bind variable used by this query whose value is number, but we don't know what runtime value it will have. Now if I run this, because the base query had the bind variable, it will expect a bind variable, without which it cannot run the query. Okay. I got my tester and I double clicked on employees. It's asking me for the bind variable. Because the design is such that I have a where condition, but it's not complete. It has a bind variable which is expecting a value. Let's say I'll give you 1 or 2 and say okay. I got employee with ID 1 or 2, no other employees. Okay, I want to repeat it. I'm double clicking it. I'll close it first. Double clicking it, and it's again asking me bind variable. This time I'll give 105. Say okay. I got a different employee with 105. If you see in the log, we ran it twice. And for the first time when we ran it, it was expecting a bind variable here, and the bind variable was 102 which we provided. So it used that bind variable and ran the query. Second time we provided different bind variable, and it used that bind variable and ran it. Now, that is about bind variables, how you can use them to provide a runtime value. Second thing, I want the where clause itself to be appended at runtime. I don't want it to be appended always. I want the base query to be simple and the where clause should be appended at the runtime. In that case, what I'll do is, I'll not put it here. I'll go to view criteria tab. View criteria means a runtime where clause. Okay, I removed it from the query, so my query is now full query. In the view criteria, I'm coming here and pressing this plus icon to create a new criteria. It will have a name. Let's leave it at default for now. And here, you have to add the items that you want to add. Let's go with one item. And the same condition, I'm going to put it here. I'll select the attribute employee ID equals some value. So that some value can be a literal, which is hard-coded again. See, first time when I created the where condition, I gave a hard-coded value, right? So this was the condition that got created, and it was permanently appended to the query. Here, if I use a literal like this, it will not be permanently appended. The view criteria, whenever I use view criteria, this value will be permanent. But here, I'll use a bind variable again, so that I don't need to hard code the value. I'll use a bind variable. Then it's showing me the list of bind variables available. Okay, let's use this bind variable which is already available, and say okay. Now my view criteria got created. Where it comes to picture is when I run my app module now, the query is not having any where condition. So my app module, when I execute the viewer directly, one second. When I execute the viewer directly, it will give me the complete results. It's not asking me. Oh, actually, that is because I used the wrong bind variable. Just a second. So that's a bug actually. It should not have given me the bind variable which is defined for the query. I should define a bind variable separately for the view criteria. What happened was, here I'm not using the bind variable but created one. So it expects value for that. I should remove this. I'm removing it, and in the view criteria, I'll go and add a new bind variable. Type number. Okay, and let us reject this. Okay. So query pane is a different set, and view criteria is a different set. Earlier I left my unused bind variable here, so it was asking me the value. I don't want it. I want a bind variable which is in the view criteria section. Okay. I'll run this. Okay, I got my tester. Now when I run this, it ran simply without any condition. I got all the employees. So the view criteria is not applied because I have not selected it. I have to go and select. This is an option to select the view criteria. Specify view criteria. I click this and it's showing me the available list of view criteria. I have only one. I'll select this. When I select this, it will expect value for one bind variable. So that value I need to provide. Okay, say find. So it's expecting one bind variable value. I'm providing it here, 105 something. Okay, now I got the filter. So this is dynamically appending the query. Dynamically appending the where clause. Okay, this will come to use when you are doing real applications. This dynamic where criteria will be used very much because we can reuse the same view object in different scenarios and conditionally apply different view criteria. For example, the same employee view I want to use, but sometimes I might need to filter by employee ID. Sometimes I might filter by employee name, starts with or something. Also, this view criteria can be used to define search forms on the UI on the fly. So in the UI section, we will see how to use this view criteria. But for now, I just want you to understand that you can define where conditions like this, statically with the query or dynamically with view criteria, and inside both of them, you will have the bind variables which can be populated at the runtime. Okay. Right. We'll take a break here. The next steps will be to create the Java classes and we'll inspect through them. And we will see other special features of view objects like list of values and view accessors. We'll explore that things. Okay.
Okay.
We'll come back in 10 minutes.
Okay.